Hi, my name is Anatoly Ivanov and I'm the director, producer, director of photography, sound engineer, editor of the Kvadrat feature-length documentary, which you can watch online for free, either at Vimeo or YouTube. And in this movie, I'd like to talk about the gear I've chosen to shoot it. It's a rather non-standard, non-Hollywood approach, so I hope it will inspire some creative ideas to solve your creative challenges in your own movies. But first, a little bit about my background, which is non-traditional. I did 3 years of painting, after which I've been working for 15 years as an independent still photographer. And during those 15 years, I've also been working as a freelance designer, doing print design, web design, and also a little bit of industrial design. And before I talk about the gear, actually I can show it to you quickly, just so you get the idea of the first rig, because we have several rigs on this movie. I'd like to explain my general approach to gear selection. I select gear specifically for the project, for specific context, for a specific story. I don't select gear because it's cool or it's new or it's expensive or cheap or whatever. No, I select gear because of the story, because of the movie I'm going to shoot. And that's how I did it for the Kvadrat movie. So let me define this story, this context, that working environment that I was planning. First, and major factor, was that we were going to work with a one-man crew. That means me. No focus puller, no sound man, no clapper loader. In other words, no film crew. Of course, we had assistants helping from time to time, but it was mostly me and the main character of the movie. The second major factor was that I was going to shoot in a very low light, and mostly artificial low light. So ISO wise, it was going to be around 2500 to 3200, typical. I don't say 2500 because I prefer to standardize with my French and my Russian, which don't use this convention, so bear with me. And I was going as high as 6400 ISO and shooting in those conditions without any additional lights. The third factor was that I was going to carry all the gear on me and without anyone's help. That includes, for example, my MacBook Pro, the chargers, the batteries, the cables, you know, the lenses, all the clothing, my living accessories, just like my toothbrush, my medical stuff, my shaver, whatever, everything with me. It had to be completely self-sufficient. We were going to shoot abroad, far from production bases and in temperatures from plus 35 degrees Celsius to minus 15 degrees Celsius. And all this stuff would have to be carried in this little backpack. And even worse, I had to shoot the movie while carrying all the gear. It's about 15 kilos on my back and, just like this, running around and concentrating on the image, on the story, while carrying the stuff. Another huge factor was the look, the aesthetic that kind of looked the same as my still photography. After all, I've been doing it for 15 years and I wanted to make something similar, same colors, same kind of depth of field, tonal range, detail, sharpness, and all the gear had to be as compact as possible to shoot in cars, in trains, in planes, and not business class, but economy class. So, for example, we've developed this small rig here just for that, to be able to do that. And another factor was to be able to shoot in densely packed nightclubs with mostly drunken crowds and not kill someone dropping a huge slider or crane or whatever, sandbag or piece of equipment and killing someone while everyone is having fun and dancing around. The other factor that influenced the gear choice was just gear availability, and I'm shooting this documentary now, but I was considering the gear in spring 2011 and I had to choose what was readily available, no beta cameras. And the last factor, but of course not the least, was the budget, and we had a very low budget. The context that I've just defined filters out a lot of gear almost immediately, and I'll go through the consequences of this movie making context. First of all, low light. Low light means digital. Why? Well, simply there's just no film stock available at higher than 400 ISO. Okay, you can push process it, but still you're not getting into 6400 ISO with film. So I would have to choose digital. Second, the photographic aesthetic. Automatically, it means the sensor size should be at least as big as the 35mm cinema film. And that would be the major factor that allowed me to control the depth of field. Because my approach is that if I want to make it really deep, focus on the whole range, I can close the aperture and everything will be deeply focused. If I want a shallow focus, then I need to open the lens and I need the sensor to allow me this shallow depth, which automatically filters out all the kind of news gathering camcorders with deep focus. Although technically that would be the ideal for this kind of movie being shot by one person with audio integrated, very light, compact, all automatic. But it wouldn't work stylistically wise. And I'd require excellent photographic lenses, and I'll get into that more in detail later. The third consequence, the weight and bulk carried by me. Well, unfortunately, that means no tripod, because a cinema, or at least a video professional tripod with a fluid head, they're just big and heavy. And I've tried to assemble something as light as possible and as compact as possible, and actually I'm shooting it right now with this tripod, and it's a Jito GT3541 LS systematic 6-section carbon fiber tripod. The legs. On top of that is the 75mm video ball adapter. And on top of that is the Zachtler FSB8 head, fluid head, which is great. But even that was just too big and too heavy to carry around while shooting. And of course, no dollies, because, well, even with the trackless dolly, it's quite difficult to carry on your back in a backpack. No sliders, although there are some compact sliders, no jibs, no cranes, that would require a truck. No car mounts, because even the small ones would just, it's suction up here and here and here, just too big. And no additional lighting. Even the small LED lights, they take up space. And actually, that is okay. It's not as bad as no tripod, because I'm used to using a tripod. I'm used to working without any additional lights in still photography, so that's not a big deal for me. And I like that unlit look, and when I shoot, I just choose my timing and choose the perfect location with available light, which look good. The fourth consequence is quite a big deal. No focus puller. Because if I choose the cinematographic aesthetic, that means manual focus. And manual focus is normally done by a focus puller. Especially if I use a Steadicam, and that's exactly what I would prefer to use on this movie. A lot of walking around and a kind of substitute to a dolly. So without a focus puller, I can't use a Steadicam, because normally you use two hands to control the Steadicam, and I have only two of them. The third one would maybe control the focus wireless unit. Quite impossible. So that leaves me with only shoulder mounted or handheld solutions. And I like to distinguish between the two. I think the term handheld used in cinema is kind of strange, because I can show you a handheld rig. And by handheld, what I mean personally is something that you actually hold just with your two hands, and that's it. Like almost like a still photography camera. And the shoulder mounted solution means the camera is actually on my shoulder. Of course, I'm using the hands as well, but it's quite different. The weight is on my shoulder, at least partially. So that's why I like to distinguish the two when I talk about handheld and shoulder mounted. The consequence of the lenses, which I've talked about earlier, just an example. Why I always start talking and thinking about lenses? Well, everything starts with the lens. I mean, if you take a camera, it's generally the first thing that sees the light getting inside to the sensor. And I like to first choose a lens system and then go to the camera choice. So, choosing a lens. First of all, I choose the focal length of the lenses I'm going to use. And it's a very personal choice. I mean, it really depends on your perception of the image it gives you. And I've spent 15 years in still photography choosing the focal lengths that work best for me. And again, it's very subjective. So if I use the Cinema 35mm format, the minimum focal length that I work with is 25mm. The maximum is 200mm. Anything wider, it's just too wide. I mean, the distortions are too big. They're too, I don't like them. That's as simple as that. And anything going, more telephoto than 200, that's just also too much compression to my taste. Next, focal length wise, I prefer zooms instead of primes. Why? Well, the main reason is it allows me a much more precise framing when I can't physically move. For example, right now I'm sitting and I can't move from, let's say, 32 to 40. And that's exactly the predicament I was going to have while shooting from a car, shooting from an airplane, and a standard airplane, not a fighter jet willing to fly anywhere I ask, but a standard airline aircraft. When you're sitting there and you can't move with the camera. So if you want to frame precisely, I prefer a zoom to do that. I can just dial in exactly where the framing stops. The primes, they jump in two big steps. For example, if you take Zeiss primes, it's 32, 40, 50, 65, 85, 100, 135. And it's just too big. I want 106, 107. And what do I do if I'm stuck in an airplane? Another parameter is that without an assistance from people around you, zooms are just easier to use. They're just less rig changes. If you have two assistants, yeah, they just say, oh, I want 40 here. No, change it for 85, and they do it for you. When you're alone shooting the thing, the less work, to change and set up your rig, the better. And if I want to cover the full spectrum from 25mm to 200mm, zooms are just lighter, to operate when you're on the rig and just to carry around, like in my lens pouch. After I've selected more or less the focal lengths, I have to consider the lens mount, because there are several lens mounts used in the cinema world. And basically I had a choice of cinema dedicated PL mount lenses, Nikon F mount lenses, and the Canon EF mount lenses. The PL mount is very interesting, and it has a lot of positive aspects and negative aspects. The positives are it's just made for cinema work. It's all mechanical, there's just no flex, the lenses are big, and they don't move. Most of them have integrated outside gears for focus, for zoom. Well, that's not a PL mount lens, but just to show you the gear. For aperture, separated, third ring for aperture. And they have a huge focus ring rotation arc for manual focusing. So it can be around 300 degrees, a huge diameter. So you turn it slowly to focus manually, which is great. And the focus remains constant throughout the zooming. And the gear, when you change the lens, the gear positions, they don't change from one lens to another, at least when you're working with one make, for example, Zeiss or Canon. They're kind of standardized, and that's great. It saves you time. But there's, a lot of negative aspects. All PL mount lenses lack any internal stabilization. So if, like in my case, I just told you, you're shooting a shoulder mount or handheld, you automatically get the Jason Bourne 2 and 3 by Paul Greengrass kind of look. It just shakes all the time. And a lot of Canon EF mount still photography lenses, they have internal stabilization, which normally helps to shoot photographs with lower shutter speeds. But in the case of cinema, like with this lens, it's a 70-200, and a 200, if you just shake a little bit, you'd notice the jitter immediately. But with IS, image stabilization, it kind of smooths out the micro jitter, which you get when shooting shoulder or handheld. And it improves the overall kind of appearance of the shaky footage. It's not an equivalent to a Steadicam at all, but it's better. It's better than just the classical PL mount lens where you see each and every tiny bit of lens movement. And all PL mount zooms, if we're talking about zooms, are just super heavy. They are at least 2 kilos. Even if you consider the latest and greatest and lightest Canon 30-105 opening at 2.8, it's 2 kilos and something. And that's a lot for a one-man crew. And none of them feature any weather sealing. So shooting in the rain is not advisable. The other factor to consider, a negative factor, is just the price. A single Zeiss zoom would eat the whole initial budget for our movie. It makes you think twice before you choose the PL mount. The other mount available is the Nikon F mount. And the stabilized Nikon F lenses are very similar to Canon EF lenses. They're different colorways when you're talking about telephoto, but they're quite similar. There are people who prefer Canon, there are people who prefer Nikon. I prefer Canon, and I've been working with Canon EF L lenses since 1999. And so the Canon EF mount also has a lot of positive aspects and a lot of negative aspects. A lot of L lenses from Canon have image stabilization. They're very light compared to PL mount lenses. And even big zooms like this, they're just super light compared to PL mount lenses. And of course, for a photographer, they're still super heavy. But for a cinema director of photography, they're extremely light. They're very compact compared to PL mount lenses. The main reason being that you don't have to integrate the gears. You can, shift focus while zooming. So it allows for much simpler optical systems and just smaller size. The newest lenses are all weather sealed, so you can shoot with this in the rain, no problem. Dust, whatever, just go ahead and shoot. And another positive feature of the Canon lenses, they look like a photography lens. And the 24-70, for example, you look like a photographer, which is good if you're shooting a documentary. And of course, they're very, very cheap compared to the PL mount lenses. I mean, the prices, they're still quite expensive if you're just starting out, but compared to the PL mount lenses, the primes or the zooms, they're just very, very cheap. But they have a lot of negative aspects. They're first of all, they're just made for still photography. They're not made for cinema production. They're all, I mean, the newest ones are all motor driven. They have really good ceramic motors inside, and just the mount itself, it introduces a lot of flex when you put the lens on the camera, because when shooting still photography, it's not a big deal. I mean, once you frame the shot, it's there, just release the shutter, it's done. But in cinema, with all the follow focus systems and the zoom systems, etc., it has to be absolutely rock solid, no movement. And the Canon lenses, non-cinema lenses, the EF lenses, the mount itself was never ever designed to allow that rock solidness. It was just never considered. And of course, they have no integrated outside gears for focus or zoom. And same thing for aperture. The aperture is controlled from the outside, from the camera, just using the dial on the camera, and it goes in steps. Okay, one third, but still you get this jumpy click click click, and it doesn't look good. The focus ring, generally the rotation arc is just tiny, super tiny, and it's logical because it's made for autofocus, and the autofocus motor inside, it requires just the least amount of rotation to focus, because the longer the throw, the longer it takes to focus with a still lens. And so Canon and Nikon, the same thing. They've tried to minimize the length the motor has to drive the focus ring, which is great for still lens. But cinema lens, it's a nightmare, because you turn just a little bit and already you're in infinity. And another negative feature is the focus shift while zooming. On the 70-200 I have here, it's not as bad, but on the 24-105, it is very, very present. So if you focused on one point and you're zooming while shooting, the focus starts to shift. So you have to zoom and change the focus at the same time to remain focused on the object you're zooming in or out. And that's possible, and I've done it, and I've been doing it actually for quite a while, but it really complicates your life as a DP. And of course, the gear positioning, outside gear positioning, is completely inconsistent. So when I change a lens, for example, let's take this one. As you can see, that's the 24-105. Compare it with the 70-200. You have to change the follow focus, and on the other side you can see the zoom control each time you change the lens. And it takes time, it takes effort, and it's a pain. But now let's talk about optical quality, because all the outsides and the ergonomics, nice, but what about the final result, the image itself? In my opinion, and it's not just an opinion based on some deductions, it's really tests. Most top-of-the-line lenses by Zeiss, Fujinon, Canon, Nikon, they're all great. And they're all made for high-resolution sensors, and they provide a very nice image. And people who say, "Oh no, the cinema lenses are so much sharper, much, the levels of distortions are extremely low." Well, in most professional still photography or cinema lenses, they're all kind of create a very, very nice, very sharp, distortionless image. So that's not a major factor. So now that I've defined the lenses, the parameters for the lenses, I can go into camera bodies. So again, only digital cameras, no film cameras. Otherwise, I'd choose an ARRI, of course. In the beginning of 2011, the two dedicated cinema cameras, digital cinema cameras, that had a 35mm cinema film size sensor and which worked in low light were the ARRI Alexa and the Sony f3. That's it. Not much choice. The Red Epic is great when you light your scene, and as soon as you go really into darkness, it's not as great. So I'll go through these two. The ARRI Alexa is excellent when it comes to image quality. It's got an excellent raw codec, extremely high bit rate. It's great for post-production. You can, push and pull in any directions. The tonal range is huge. And the color, you can change everything. The sensor is cooled by an active cooling system, and just the whole camera is made for cinema production. It's got all the ergonomics. The buttons are on the outside. It's very nice to work with. But the negative aspects are pretty bad, actually, because first of all, the Alexa is heavy. It's huge. The moment you put it on your shoulder, it immediately attracts attention. You look like a cinema guy immediately from 500 meters. Everyone's, oh, there's a movie being made. Another negative is that there's just no Canon EF mount version of the Alexa, so it kind of forces you to choose PL mount lenses. And there's no weather sealing. You can't run with it into the rain and shoot. And another major negative point is, and it's just too expensive for our budget. Over the top. Now, the Sony f3 has a lot of positives as well. Very nice image, very good codec, bitrate options are great, so you can color grade and change your picture in post as much as you like. And it's smaller than the Alexa, quite a bit smaller. Looks more like a news camera than a cinema camera from the outside. But it still has the cinema production ergonomics, all the inputs, outputs, the buttons. But it's still quite bulky. It's still quite heavy for, a one-person team. And it still attracts a lot of attention. You look more like a TV newsman than a cinema production man. And it has no elegant Canon EF mount adapter with working image stabilization. Yes, there are some adapters that allow you to choose the aperture, but the IS is not working, and the whole point of choosing a Canon or actually a Nikon F mount with stabilization is the stabilization, and suddenly you don't have it. So why choose that? You would still have to choose a PL mount lens. And it's still not weather sealed. You can shoot in the rain. And it's still a bit too expensive for the budget. So that left me basically with just still photography digital SLRs to be adapted and used as cinema cameras. And I've considered
several cameras, all of them Canons, the Canon 5D Mark II, the Canon 1D Mark IV, and the Canon 7D, which I immediately kind of discarded because it was just worse image-wise than the 5D or the 1D. I know it allows you to kind of modify it and use it with PL style lenses, but in my case, as I was more thinking about the Canon lenses, it just wasn't being an argument for me. So the Canon 5D Mark II, I just got both actually, the 5D and the 1D, and started shooting with them in real life conditions. And the 5D was unfortunately unusable at 3200 ISO. The noise level was way too much. The rolling shutter as well was unusable when not on the tripod. If you're on the tripod and you're panning and tilting slowly, it's great. But if you're just walking on the shoulder or holding it like this, very, very small rig, you get the jello thing, and it's unusable. The Mark II HDMI out was standard definition 480p, and when you output that to an external monitor, that makes the focusing extremely difficult. So I ended up choosing the Canon 1D Mark IV, and I'm going to talk a little bit about its positive aspects as well as its negative aspects. The great thing about it is, of course, it has the Canon EF mount, which works great with Canon stabilized lenses, which in the case of this movie was a huge asset. The other very welcome feature of this camera is that it looks, the images, the footage, look very close to my Canon 1DS that I've been using since Mark I. And okay, it's not the same sensor size, it's smaller, and it's not the Canon 1DS raw 16-bit images, but still it's quite similar in the way the color works and the way the tonal range presents itself. So it's a very, very seamless shift, graphically, visually speaking, for me as a photographer. Another very important feature is that it's very, very usable at 3200 ISO and even at 6400 ISO. There is noise, but it's quite easily removable in post-production, and it gives you very usable images, and you can shoot under weak street lamps or under the moon. You get a very nice result, and it's super compact. Not in photography, still photography terms, but in cinema terms. This is from the side and from even the front. It's still very small, and I've built a small rig for it, so handheld, it's extremely compact, and I can shoot even without the Zacuto viewfinder. I can remove it, just put it in here, put myself back to a wall, and basically I require this much of space to shoot something, which is just crazy compared to the big cinema equipment you normally use. Another very positive aspect of this camera is that if you're using the compact handheld rig,
you look as a standard, well, not standard, professional photographer. And believe me, looking like a professional photographer is always better than looking like a cinema or TV crew in places like Russia. If you start shooting like a TV news reporter, you immediately get yourself into trouble. If you have anyone on the crew who speaks Russian with an accent, it's even worse. So looking as a photographer is great when you're shooting a documentary. And of course the ability to shoot with it in the rain is just something that I wasn't appreciating as a still photographer, because we've been able to do that for years and years. I mean, even before digital came along. And when I got into cinema, I was absolutely shocked to find that people use plastic bags to be able to shoot scenes like, the Inception rainy scene. That's just ridiculous, in my opinion. And with this camera and appropriate L-lens, you can do it without any additional gear. Perfectly feasible. Now, the negative aspects are quite important too. First of all, the codec is just terrible. It's low bitrate, it's overcompressed H.264, and that means it's impossible to push in post-production. I mean, the image just starts to fall apart and get posterization, bending, in the sky, or if you remove the noise, for example, from a 6400 ISO footage, under it what you find is actually the H.264 compression artifacts, which is not very welcome. Another huge problem that I've discovered only during production is hot pixels. Looks like a pink or green pixel on the image, just permanently on, and because it lacks any active cooling, there's no fan, no liquid cooling system, the sensor overheats when used at high ISO, and it starts to get random hot pixels, and it goes away only when the sensor cools down. And so we had to buy two camera bodies. So the camera B used on the small rig, and the camera A used on the main rig. And so what I would do, as soon as the camera A would heat up and start to get hot pixels, you can start to see them when they heat up, before they get out of control. I would just swap the A camera to the B camera and wait for the A camera to cool down while I shoot with the B camera. Then swap back and rotate. As you can see here, there's quite a bit of things to change to swap the camera bodies. So quite involving in to change, but it was too late. Basically, the budget was already closer to the Sony f3, but we've already shot the major parts of the movie, and I needed to maintain the same look, the same feel, and the difference between the f3 and the Canon 1D Mark IV, they're quite significant, and I would suffer in post-production. It would be too different. So we just got another camera, another body, and shot that way. The other big problem is moire. The Canon still cameras were never designed for cinema production. They're sensors that are optimized for high-resolution still photography, and they need to downsample image data to record 1080p movies. So you're more likely to get moire than when using a dedicated film sensor. The 1D has another kind of particular problem, and it's aliasing on fine details like fine print on street signs, for example, or detail on brick walls. It looks weird, colors going wrong. The rolling shutter is much better than the 5D Mark II, and it's usable as a handheld or shoulder-mounted camera, but it's still there. So if you start to really run and gun with this camera, you get the jello effect pretty quickly. The other negative aspect is that it's a great still camera, ergonomics wise. It's really nice to use as a still photography camera, but as a cinema camera, it's just not made for that. Although it's much better than the 5D, they've added, small custom functions where you can use some buttons to start and shoot and change settings, and it's better, but it's just nowhere near a dedicated cinema camera with all the button layout specifically designed for shooting motion pictures. And another problem is the distance between the lens and the cinema rods, which is much higher than the industry standard, because the camera body is actually much taller than what's used in cinema, or even compared to the 5D. So most cinema accessories, that means the follow focus units, the zoom devices, etc., they just, you buy them, you put them on the rods, and they don't work because it's just much higher. And the manufacturers of these accessories, they absolutely stated clearly that we do not support this camera because it's non-standard height. And that had to be solved by customizing everything. And I'm going to get into that later. But overall, this is really the best camera within the budget, within the technical constraints, within the weight and bulk, etc., constraints that I've spent a lot of time explaining. This is really the best camera that we could get at that time in the beginning of 2011. Of course, today there are much better, newer cameras on the market which you should consider if you're thinking about your next project today. For example, the Canon 1DX, which is the equivalent of the 1D Mark IV that I've used, or even better, the Canon C300, or even the Blackmagic Cinema camera. They're much better almost in every aspect. Now that I've chosen the camera body, the Canon 1D Mark IV, which lens? Well, with this body and my lens requirements, I chose only two lenses, and that is the Canon 24-105mm L lens with image stabilization, and a 70-200 2.8 IS, also image stabilized lens. And interestingly enough, it's the same lenses I use in my still photography work, which is much simpler for me as a switch, because they have parameters and look that I'm used to, and I know what's going to happen if I use them on a particular color or whatever. And I wished I could use more of my other Canon lenses, for example my tilt and shift lenses, and I brought a 24mm on the first day of the shoot with me, but it turned out there was no space in my backpack for it, and so I left it on the second day and couldn't use it. The lenses from Canon that are made for still photography, of course, need to be modified to work with the follow focus on one side and with the zoom control on the other side. And to do that, what I prefer is the very stiff, very nice Redrock micro lens gear that wraps around the lens and exists in different sizes and also exists in black instead of Redrock blue, which is kind of nice and adds a touch of color here and there, but I prefer black for stealth reasons. And their lens gear is excellent. It's really rock solid. It's made out of very hard plastic and it increases the diameter. If you look like this, you can actually see that the initial diameter of the lens is this big, and then with the lens gear you increase this diameter. So this is the case for the zoom control, but with the 24-105 it increases the diameter significantly and it doesn't shift at all. I've shot with these for a year and never ever had to readjust or move them even once. And the plastic, actually, it's so hard that during one shoot I just cut myself and I still got the scar. It was, blood all around, and of course I didn't notice it because it was dark, and after we wrapped the shot and everyone was like, "What's that red thing on you?" "Oh, it's blood everywhere." So just to tell you that compared to, for example, Zacuto's lens gear, this thing is almost as hard as a metal gear, because the Zacutos, they would just get mashed into unusable porridge by my crossed seal or other gear. The front element on each and every lens I use, either in photography, still photography, or cinema, should be protected with a UV filter, in my opinion. Why? Because it costs nothing compared to the front element, the replacement of the front element, in case you break it, you scratch it, or whatever. It actually happened once during the shoot that while cleaning the filter protecting the front element, I've scratched somehow the surface, and it was very easy to replace in time. I mean, in about 2 hours. So that's in addition to each and every lens, a simple UV filter. Film production, when seen from outside, looks a little bit like grown-ups playing with Lego, and for a photographer it's almost never necessary to invent your own gear. Okay, in the studio you have to improvise with lighting, with props, etc. But the gear itself, the camera, basically you go buy it and it's already good to go. In the film industry, inventing and adapting gear is a standard approach. which for me was quite a surprise. But it does allow custom solutions tailored to your needs, and that's exactly the approach I took for building two rigs. The main heavy big rig, which you can see here, and that's the rig that's shoulder mounted, as I've explained. I don't call it a handheld rig. Okay, I use the hands, but mostly the shoulder. And this is the rig that I've used to shoot the main scenes, and whenever I could use this one, I would use this one because it's the most stable, it has the biggest screen, etc. And the second rig that I've built for this movie is the handheld rig. Which I'm showing you now. It's not actually, what you see is not the complete build up, because I'm using parts of this rig to actually film this movie, but you get the general idea. There will be a handle, I'll get into that, and I'll shoot this one specifically, because actually the compact rig reuses some of the elements of the main rig just for lightness and compactness of the whole thing. Like the follow focus is reused from the main rig on the compact rig. And the small rig, the compact rig, allows to shoot in very tight spaces like planes. And it looks almost like a photographer's camera, which is great in places where you don't want to be looked at like a cinema or news gathering team. And it allows to shoot in rain, because all of the optics that I've chosen, okay, this is the 2470, I'm just using it here for demonstration purposes, but they all allow to shoot in the rain, and that's what I've used. As you may have already noticed, I use tape to cover labels, markings, and other points and locations of my gear. And actually I use electrical tape instead of the classical gaffer tape. And the main reason is that gaffer tape has a rough kind of exterior, and electrical tape has a thinner, smoother exterior, you know, with a plasticky finish and feel. And the gaffer tape is also, it doesn't leave any residue. The electrical tape does leave residue a little bit, but it's removable with alcohol. You can just rub it off, but don't use it on clothes. That's not a good idea. So why do I cover my gear with all this tape? Well, mainly for two reasons. The reason number one is that it gives your gear a kind of do-it-yourself look, and it looks just cheaper, and even, you know, like gear falling apart with, you know, the port out, etc. And it doesn't leave any huge big name brands on the outside, which is attracting less attention from people. The other reason I do this is it protects the gear in high risk areas like this one here, or on the side. You know, this part here actually touches the ground when I put the main rig down somewhere. And it's much cheaper to just replace some tape than to replace the whole camera body. And when you want to return your gear, if you're renting it, or if you have bought your gear, you want to sell it, you just sell a better preserved gear. And cinema gear generally gets more abuse than still photography gear, simply because you shoot continuously for longer periods of time, and you don't notice your surroundings as well as when shooting still pictures, because you're all the time you're focusing on the framing and you're shooting continuously. So I really recommend to tape over as much as possible. As the base of the rig, I use a pair of Red Rock Micro carbon fiber rods. They're in 15mm diameter and they are 46 centimeter long. I prefer carbon fiber to aluminum because of its stealth, it's lightweight, and its somewhat warmth in cold weather. The length should be as short as possible for compactness, but as long as possible to fit all the stuff on the rig. And the 46 centimeter is barely enough. Your accessories take a lot of space. The attachment system I use for both rigs, actually I'm showing you now the compact rig, it's missing some parts for you to be able to see more of the detail of the attachment system. It's the attachment system used in still photography world, and it's using the Really Right Stuff, also called Arca Swiss sometimes, system. Basically how it works is, I'm just gonna use my knee, perfect mounting accessory, is you get a plate for the camera, you screw it to the tripod hole, and the plate is actually custom machined by Really Right Stuff to hug the camera body precisely. So it has kind of lugs, I'd say, on the sides. So there's absolutely no rotation and no upwards and downwards flex. Use just one Allen key here to screw the camera to the plate, or screw the plate to the camera, whatever you prefer. And using quite a bit of torque, I mean, without breaking the whole thing, not damaging the threads. And once it's screwed in, you can actually move the camera from one clamp to the other. Now, the clamp uses this dovetail interface here, goes inside the clamp, and then you just clamp the dovetail and it holds the camera. Okay, in this case, there's just a lever. On the main rig I have a knob. I'm using the Red Rock Micro clamp for Really Right Stuff attached to the 15mm rods here. Take the camera, put it on the clamp, so from the side, yeah, like this, and then you just lock the whole system together. And once it's clamped, you don't need any screws. The two major advantages of this system are, first, it's just absolutely rock solid. Once it's clamped, or on the main rig I use a knob, it just absolutely doesn't move. It's like one piece of steel, and the camera actually is so solidly connected to the whole assembly that you can lift, well, of course the compact rig is light, but you can actually lift the big one, the 8-kilo one that I have, and the only thing that can break is just the thread of the camera, or somewhere here, because I'm using a 1D, which is very tough camera made for war photographers. It's extremely solid. It just absolutely doesn't move, which is essential for the follow focus gears. Now I'm using a non-geared 2470 just for demonstration purposes, but you get the idea. And the second big advantage is that using this system, you can actually shift the optical axis. You can slide the camera from right to left, and basically lock, well, almost anywhere where I still get the rails of the clamp and of the camera plate. And in my case, I put it to the right of the normal optical center. I put it there, and the main reason for that is to make it work with standard cinema accessories, in spite of the fact that the lens is much higher than the standard used in cinema because of the Canon 1D extra tall body. Those two are their 15mm rods, and the normal center is here. But the optical axis, the optical center of the lens, as you can see, is shifted to the operator's right, so that the follow focus gear here can come into contact with the lens, and you can actually use the follow focus without any major modification to it on a much higher placed lens because of the camera that I've selected, which is just much taller than the standard. And that's the little trick that allows the use of kind of standard equipment with non-standard lens height. Again, I just shift the camera to the side. This is a good reference, actually. This is the center, and optically it should have been to this side, and it's not. And the same stands true for this fluid zoom system, also by Crostseal. It is, because it's shifted to the right, there is enough space for the gear to come under and kind of to the at the side of the lens, and then control it like so. Okay, so you get the idea. Zoom out and zoom in, and that allowed me to move the camera body away from my head, because if I would have centered the camera and the lens exactly over the center of the rods between them, that would leave a lot less headroom for me. I would be keeping my head slightly to the side. This camera placement allows me to even look to my right, shift the camera, the rig, and just more breathing space. Another reason is to counterbalance the huge and heavy monitor. It's about 700 grams. To counterbalance it using the weight of the camera and the lens. So as I shift it to the right, kind of the whole weight shifts to the right and counterbalances the huge monitor. I mean, it's not perfect. In physics, I would move it maybe half a meter to my right, but it's already better. So I'm using the Really Right Stuff plate for Canon 1D, the B2 Pro 60mm screw release clamp with a knob, and the Red Rock Micro clamp for Really Right Stuff interface, which works with standard 15mm rods and allows to use any other Arca Swiss style clamp on top. For comparison, this is the same setup that I'm using for the compact rig. The only difference is the clamping method. On the compact rig, I use a lever which opens like this and clears the dovetail and closes down like this. On the main rig, I prefer a screw knob, simply for access reasons and for slightly greater clamping force. But even on the compact rig, the lever clamp creates an extremely strong assembly. On the Really Right Stuff clamp, there are 3 holes, and you can use 2 of them to screw the clamp to the Red Rock Micro clamp made for Really Right Stuff system, which works with industry standard 15mm rods and gives you a very low and tight system to hold your camera. If I rotate it and show you the underside of the Red Rock Micro platform, it has 5 very nicely threaded holes, which you can use to attach stuff under your rig. And in my case, I'm going to show you later on, I'm attaching the shoulder assembly using those huge bolts, using American non-matrix thread. So you basically screw it in and it gives you an extremely solid attachment. You can use these to connect the Red Rock Micro shoulder pad to the whole rig. Basically, here it's taped, so you can't see it, but trust me, there's a huge hole allowing you to pass these screws in, and using the 2 holes connect the shoulder system, shoulder pad, this thing, to the rig, to the Really Right Stuff clamp made by Red Rock. The only modification that you need to do is remove the threads on these 2 holes, because the shoulder pad by Red Rock, it comes with holes already threaded for the same size actually as these screws, and you can't of course attach 2 threaded systems, so you need to remove the threads on the shoulder pad. And it's actually pretty easy, just file them with a round file and then screw it in. The Red Rock Micro shoulder pad has 2 holes here, which you can use to attach it to a tripod plate, and it's great. Basically attach permanently a tripod plate here, and you can switch from a shoulder mount system to a tripod mount system in a matter of, okay, let's say 15 seconds. And it's really handy. In my case, I was not going to use a tripod because it was too heavy. So instead of using the tripod, I've used these to connect the audio recorder underneath. It's just a piece of aluminum. I made it in AutoCAD. It has drilled holes for the Red Rock Micro shoulder pad and 1 hole for the audio recorder. You will need to rethread the holes on the Red Rock Micro shoulder pad because they're not threaded deeply enough. I don't know why, but it's quite simple to rethread. So in the end, well, I just painted mine. It's the same plate, and then I added some padding. That allows you to move the audio recorder as close to the subject as possible and as far from the camera noise, including the follow focus, as possible. And it's centered under your rig, and it's a very robust system. It doesn't use any articulated arms or whatever. It's just a piece of aluminum with 2 screws and just won't move at all. It's very light for such a robust attachment system, and it's very simple, and anything that's simple generally works better than complicated systems. So I've padded this section of the rig with closed cell polyethylene foam to allow me to film from the knee or from the hip or whatever you call it. It actually gives almost a tripod-like stability and effect. So basically I'm squatting like this, and I roll the camera. I can watch what's going on the screen, on the monitor, and just brace the battery to my knee and film. And it's almost not moving. Of course it depends on the muscles of your legs, but you can pretty much be extremely precise and stable with this. Another alternative, I mean, if I just rotate and show you from the other knee slightly to the side, using both hands and the follow focus, and you can even do pans with it, you know, quite good pans, just like this. Have one rotation point. Of course, it's not as good as a tripod, but it's quite usable. And same thing, you know, from another point. And, you know, at a lower level, you can maybe put it higher like this and just lock it up. The video control or framing system determines the layout of the whole rig, whether big or small or complicated or simple. Basically, where you put the handles, where you put the follow focus, like on this one, where do you put the body brace, etc., etc. Why? Well, it's pretty simple. Humans have to see things and they use their eyes, and where you're looking determines how you put the other stuff around. And today we have only 2 solutions to control the framing, the picture. The most obvious is a dedicated viewfinder. On a cinema camera like the Relaxa, it's integrated inside the system and generally very nice. On a camera like the 1D Mark IV, you don't have such nicety, and you have to use a snap-on viewfinder like made by Zacuto, or you can use an external viewfinder and use the HDMI out to view the picture. And that's how you would do it, and that's how I did it in a lot of cases. The other solution is an external monitor, you know, like this one by Marshall, and you basically take a look at it like this. And I also put off my glasses because I'm short-sighted. And the choice between the 2 solutions, the viewfinder or the external monitor, is very personal choice. I don't like viewfinders. I feel completely cut off from reality around the frame, and I know that it's one of the main reasons a lot of people like them, because they need to concentrate on the picture. They don't want to see, you know, the stuff around. They just need the final frame and that's it. But for me, it's extremely important to know what's going on around me, around the picture, what are the opportunities around me. And I just need to watch my step, because I generally don't rely on an assistant to keep me vertical when I walk up the stairs or whatever. And a monitor allows me to remain aware of the surroundings, and it keeps my both eyes open like this. Even though I'm short-sighted, I can still see that there's a truck ready to run me over. And in still photography, it's different, because if something outside is happening, well, it's not a big deal. You just reframe, and you can actually shoot with one eye in the viewfinder, the other out of the viewfinder, and it's not as cloaking as with a big cinema viewfinder. But in documentary cinematography, you really have to anticipate that something is going to enter the frame, something unplanned. It's very different from fiction cinematography, where almost everything is planned in advance, and you have the marks and focusing marks, and the actors move almost exactly as you tell them if they're good. And so for me, it's important to kind of have a general idea of what I'm shooting, and that's one of the main reasons I use an external monitor on the main rig. Now that I've chosen the viewing solution, that means the external monitor, I can build the rig from that. And in order to build the rig, you need to think about the way to handle the rig. And we humans only have two hands. And in my case, my left hand is weaker than the right hand. And so while building the rig, you need to think about where you put a handle or some other implement to hold and operate the rig, because you need not only hold it, but also focus. And you see, I changed to my right hand, which is stronger. You can zoom with the other hand and adjust the settings on the camera, and also adjust the audio input and output levels, because in my case it's just one operator. I don't have a dedicated sound man, and I don't have a focus puller. So the left hand on my rig, on my main rig, is just holding normally the main rig, and sometimes, as I've just shown you, zooming around. The right hand, which is my strong hand, is holding the rig like this, with this weird handle, and at the same time I can spare some power to focus and to adjust the camera settings and to adjust the sound levels. So those two are very different hand positions, and they're in very different places relative to the rods, relative to the camera. And the kind of standard cinema handheld, I don't like that term, let's say shoulder mounted approach, is to use a handlebar kind of system, which works great if you have a focus puller, and the focus unit would be more on the left, or maybe with a wireless system with a motor to allow someone to adjust the focus while standing a bit farther away. A good example are the O'Connor O-grips. They're great, I've tested them, they're very adjustable, they're extremely strong, you can really knock nails with them. They were good for that handlebar thing, but they're also extremely heavy, and most importantly, they don't allow you to have such a difference between the positions of the two handles. So they're mostly usable when you work with a focus puller. So for the left hand, I'm using the Red Rock Micro handlebar clamp, which you can see here, but just with one rod. And I bought the longest version available, which is a 8-inch length, and then cut it to size. It's painted for stealth, and some of the paint is coming off after use, of course. So it's screwed in here and using Loctite, and the edge is rectangular. The insertion point is same as on the rod. So when you input the rod, it just doesn't rotate. Rotation is limited by the rectangular shape of the socket. So if you put a lot of torque upwards or downwards, it does not rotate in any direction. It's very, very solid. It carries the Red Rock Micro handle and the monitor on the side, and the Zacuto Zwivel, if I pronounce correctly. I can lift using my other hand the whole rig with just one hand. 80 kilos, man. So I need another one. Yeah, and it just does not move. It's very, very strong, very solid, and of course it's using a little bit of Loctite, but still. And it's very light for its strength. And I've done this one handle thing with even the heavier 70-200 lens, and it just does not move, and has never moved through the whole year of shooting with this system. Actually 10 kilos with a bigger 70-200 millimeter lens. So the right handle for the right hand. I'm using a kind of weird combo of the Red Rock Micro grip rod, which allows to attach a handle under the follow focus unit, and I bought it in the 8-inch length, which is actually the longest possible, and then I cut it as short as possible, and I cut it to size. Normally then what I do is I repaint it, and some paint has gone off, but it's for stealth and visibility, a lower visibility. And on top of this rod I put the Red Rock Micro hand grip, and I cut this one as well, as short and as small as possible to fit my palm. So basically I hold the rig like this, and it allows my fingers to remain free to operate the follow focus and dial the big knob. And by the way, it's Red Rock Micro hand grip accent kit in black, which converts their regular blue hand grips into a black one, so it makes a stealthier rig. The follow focus on top of this, which is of course sitting on the rods, is a Crossseal 206-01S follow focus. And as you can see, it's kind of unconventionally placed on the right. Why? Well, as I've explained, it allows me to use my stronger right hand and hold the camera, the rig, and focus at the same time. And seeing from the other side, it frees up the left to allow me to see the outboard monitor better. There's no knob here, and even actually just the knob would be maybe fine, but imagine my hand actually turning the knob all the time, full focusing all the time. That kind of takes the almost half of the screen. I would need to put the screen to my left and be working like this. So that's not optimal. So I have the whole viewing space here for the screen. And because it's a documentary and I never know what's gonna happen where, I'm not using the focusing marks at all, and there's just no need to visually see the follow focus. And as you may have noticed, I've removed the focusing marks ring, and because I don't need it at all. I can place as many marks as I like. Nothing happens according to those marks, so just no use. So I just watch the monitor and focus as I go and as things happen. And this particular follow focus is an absolutely key piece, and it should work perfectly with your hand. So it's important for you to choose maybe some other follow focus that works better with your big or small or whatever hand. We're very different in this regard. I prefer the follow focus from Crosssteel. It has an excellent grip, it's big, and the mechanics are just excellent. It has no play. It's very smooth and very precise. And the better ones that I've come across are the huger, larger, heavier ones also from Crosssteel, from ARRI, and from O'Connor. And this one is compact enough to be used on a one-man rig. To lift and carry the rig around, I use a Red Rock Micro handle without the exterior rubber. Cut to size, and I've just put some gaffer tape over it just to round up the edges. And it's barely long enough to hold with the hand, and short enough not to come into contact with the camera and the Zacuto Z-Finder mounting frame. Very small, very compact, and very light. This thing here, an extremely important thing, is the Z-Mount Zwivel by Zacuto, if I pronounce correctly. And it allows to attach this Crosssteel 3025 DV Balancer body pad rod running from the top, from this rod, it's also a 15 millimeter, down to my, basically, the rib cage and belly, depending on the height. You can adjust it here, like sliding like so, if you want to lower it and have a little bit more tilt. And this system allows to use the rig actually hands free, like Lukma, no hands. If you add a little bit of hand stabilization to this, and you don't move your torso too much, or actually if you can remain absolutely stable, the result is almost like a tripod, and you can stand there without almost any noticeable movement in the frame, which is especially extremely important for a longer lens such as the 70-200 I've been using, which allowed me to shoot extreme close-ups of the needles on the vinyl, for example. And also, it allows me to use one hand to operate the follow focus and the other hand at the same time to operate the zoom lever and focus at the same time, because the 24-105 shifts focus while zooming. And generally I use the zoom quite sparingly during the shot itself, but zooming just a little bit, zooming just a little bit out, when the scene changes. This allows me to do that. Of course, it obstructs the view to the monitor, but it's, it's usable. And without this brace, that would be just impossible. I mean, just holding it by one hand and trying to reach the zoom lever, impossible. Another great thing about this system is that you can actually rotate the whole assembly, because the Zacuto thing here just rotates on the rod. You can put it off your shoulder. Let me just unscrew this and put it on your knee or on a bag or on a table or whatever, like this. And you get a tripod-like stable platform, and you can shoot. Well, essentially it's a monopod, and you can shoot like this. I'll just add both of my hands and control the focus at the same time. Great, great, great system. As I've said before, I prefer a monitor to a viewfinder to control exposure and composition. Size-wise, I prefer the screen to be as big as possible while still remaining manageable on a shoulder-mounted rig, especially while walking through crowds. So 7 inches is about right. And in that size, this Marshall Electronics VLCD 70XP HDMI PT is really good. It has a lot of positive aspects. It's a very faithful work tool. It allows to adjust gamma, to adjust color temperature, bias, and gain of each RGB channel independently. So I can perfectly match the color and contrast of what's shown on my Marshall screen to what's shown on my ICC profiled full-size desktop display. So after the initial match, I know that what I see on the Marshall display during the shoot is exactly the H.264 video I'll get in Final Cut Pro. This display has always shown me any technical problems with video capture, such as the hot pixels and the weird horizontal bands in places lit by LEDs that, use cheap dimmers and pulse width modulation. Plus, the Marshall automatically compensates for DSLR HDMI signal cropping, so it shows full screen instead of with the vertical black bars on the sides. But this monitor also has negative aspects, and first of all, it's heavy. It's 870 grams, and that's even after I've modified it a little bit. The battery adapter from Marshall normally attaches with these screws here, and it protrudes a little bit and takes just a little bit of weight. So I just removed it, and basically you have a wire with contacts coming out, and you just can cover it with electrical isolation tape. It's different. Again, I'm not using any gaffer tape here. And it basically gives a more destroyed look to the display, and because most of the people see this when they look at you, and it takes away just a bit of space and weight, because I'm powering the unit with the main battery on the back, so just needless here. The HDMI in cable and the HDMI out, it's a loop. The major negative aspect of this display to me is the lack of waterproofness. The vents open upwards to any rain or even small drops of water, and it goes directly inside the display, all the electronics, etc. So same thing for these vents on the back and small vents there. The problem is you can't cover it with any gaffer tape or electrical installation tape, and you can't make a plastic bag that would cover it tightly, because it is a ventilation system here, and the display heats up a little bit. It's quite warm to touch. So if you cover it with tape, the thing will just burn. So don't do it. Same thing on this side. I attached the Marshall monitor onto the Redrock Micro left handlebar rod using the Redrock Micro mount with their micro spud. It's a very solid way to attach a heavy 900 grams screen. For comparison, I've tried articulated arms with the same display, and they would just swing out of position under high G-forces. For example, when tilting down quickly to reframe a shot. The screen is positioned as centrally relative to the eyes as possible. So let me show it from the other side. You can see my head, you can see the screen here. Well, it's a bit to the left, but still it's as central as possible. So, I don't have neck strain. Okay, it's a great display, but what's incredible is that no one really makes a good custom fit display hood for it. And as I was planning to shoot outside as well and during daylight, without the hood, well, you can't see as much as with the hood. So if no one makes one, well, I just built one myself. And basically I took all the measurements first, and then put it in AutoCAD, and then send the file to laser cut the pieces. It's basically aluminum plates cut to my design, and then I repainted or just painted them over with black heat-resistant paint, synthetic of course, and heated the whole thing to, I think, about 200 degrees Celsius or something. So it's really tough, and it resists the sun heating the thing. So basically it's a three-piece design with the side here, and the main hood, the top hood here. I'm using just electrical isolation tape as a hinge, and then basically you put it like this on the top, like so. Okay, and just use the small screws and start fixing the whole thing. Because they are in a triangle, once everything's screwed in, it's really tight, and it doesn't move at all. And each side has 3 holes, threaded holes. Thanks, Marshall, for doing that, because otherwise I would have needed to use some kind of Velcro or some glue or whatever. Not as elegant and tough. Okay, nice and tight. And okay, it's same thing on this one, but as you can see, it allows me to use the zoom lever to control the zoom freely. And also when I change the lens to the 70-200, the zoom control moves even closer to the hood. But of course I calculated the position of it, so it's It's enough to cover the display and works really nice under sunlight. To feed the video signal to the Marshall monitor from the Canon 1D, you have to use the easily damaged HDMI mini port on the camera. So I modified the Canon HDMI port protector to fit a cables-to-go velocity 90 degrees rotating HDMI female to HDMI mini male port saver adapter, which basically sends the HDMI cable backwards instead of to the side and into my head. This combo protected the mini port for a year of shooting, but is now unfortunately falling apart. A standard HDMI cable attaches to the modified protector and then travels under the hand grip for carrying, makes a loop just over the Anton Bauer battery there, and then goes backwards and then goes under the monitor here and up and to the port. What you see here is the Corsair CMBR 20 sunshade, as they call it. Basically it's a matte box without attachment points to the rods, so it's extremely valuable when you're using a lens like the 24-105, which extends when you zoom in or you zoom out. Of course, if you have a constant length lens, for example like the 70-200 I've also used, or you use the cine lenses, it's better to pick a matte box with rod support, so it's taking all the weight to the rods instead of hanging them on the end of the lens and decreasing the optical axis downwards so that your gears just don't work as well. But in this case, this is the primary lens that I've been using for this movie, and so a system that would allow me to work with an extending front element was absolutely crucial. And it's really good because it's lightweight, and as you can see here, just use it allows two 4x4 glass filters, and I've used those specifically to create my very ND combination using two polarizers. And when I had a bit of more time, I'd use a neutral gradiated filter and just an ND filter, or a polarizer plus the graduated filter, especially for the outside. But although of course the variable ND filter was extremely useful in a documentary setting where you go in and out of buildings and the light is changing constantly, you can't control it all the time. But the most important feature of this sunshade for me was this, the French flag. I still don't know why it's called the French flag, but it is absolutely huge. It is quite light, and it allows a shade on top of the system, optical system, which is absolutely enormous. And it's been an extremely helpful addition when shooting actually under artificial light. For example, lampposts or some direct sources of light that normally hit the lens directly. With this thing, you have much much more control on what hits the lens than what doesn't, and it really makes a big difference having this thing on or off. Maybe it's one of the kind of major quality improvers optically wise, even before the light reaches the front lens element. I would use the Crossteel CMBR 20 matte box just for the French flag. It's that important. And the combo forms a rectangular shaft, so it restricts the stray light from all sides and not just from the top. So it's much better than just the French flag attached from an articulated arm, for example. This thing here is the amazing Crossteel zoom drive. Basically, there's a lever going to a sprocket system. The main sprocket is damped by a thick lubricant inside, and then an additional sprocket connects to the zoom gear on the lens, and it allows to zoom precisely and very smoothly because it disconnects the circular kind of zooming movement from the lens, and you can really zoom in smallish increments that can vary the speed, and you can, dial the resistance. But with the 24-105, it's already a lot of weight, so it doesn't require any resistance. So you can zoom from 24 to 105 smoothly, quickly, or however you like. It's very nice. And using the Crossteel body brace, you can continue focusing. But another hidden feature of the system is actually, because this lens extends throughout the zooming process, if you tilt the system down, it slowly starts to creep and move downwards, and you end up suddenly with the lens extended, and of course the zoom range changed. So if you're filming something facing down, like I was filming in clubs, for example, from a balcony or some chair, the thing would just move and of course change my framing. So the trick is to use the feature of the Crossteel zoom drive, which allows to add more friction to the system. That's why it's called a fluid zoom drive. And to lock it down entirely, and then it locks the lens movement. It won't extend when you tilt it down, the whole rig, which is a very, very unconventional but extremely useful feature of this system. Actually, I've disassembled the whole thing here, each and every piece, from the standard configuration provided by Crossteel, in such a way that I can fit the whole cylinder under the lens and connect to the gear, despite of the height being quite more than the standard for which this unit was developed. Of course, they will void your warranty, blah blah blah, but if you want to make it work, you have to disassemble then reassemble. That's what I did, and it works perfect. I mean, thanks for Crossteel for making it really engineering disassembling friendly, because a lot of gear you start disassembling and you discover that it's permanently fixed in plastic die cast. Yeah, you can actually get different size gears for this system to customize stuff. The main idea with the power system for the main rig is to power everything from just a single battery, like this Anton Bauer HCX, and allow us to use just one single charger for this battery. Instead of using a lot of batteries, a lot of different chargers, different sizes, different cables. Also, it allows to shift the weight of the whole rig from the front, having, you know, the battery for the camera here, the battery for the audio recorder here, the battery for the monitor here, all in the front, to shift it back and leave all these elements empty and devoid of battery weight, and obtain as balanced system as possible, which you can see here. Of course, it's 1 kilo on the front. It's more than 1 kilo, but still, it's better. And there's because it's farther from the center of gravity, it kind of works better than just 1 kilo by itself. I've chosen 2 Anton Bauer Dionic HCX batteries, which are fantastic. I really love them. They're lithium, so very light for their capacities, and they work in extreme cold, which is great. And each battery is enough for a long DJ set of about 4 hours, so with 2 batteries you could shoot for 8 hours. And each battery is sufficiently heavy to act as a counterweight, so it's 1 kilo. And it's better to carry 2 identical batteries so that the counterweight is identical as well. And of course, it's much easier and much more efficient to use a battery as a counterweight instead of using some dead weight as a counterweight. Each battery has a very accurate time left at this power usage display. So basically it shows you the hour and then in 15 minutes increments on the battery, depending on what you're using at the moment. And it's very precise. During the 1 year of shooting, it never said anything out of the range. But the funny thing, when it has no power left, it just disconnects. It doesn't beep, it doesn't make anything. You're shooting, if you're not paying attention, suddenly boom, everything's off. So it happened to me, you know, more than once. The other positive aspects of this battery is that it's very tough. I haven't tried dropping it from a 16th floor, but they're made out of special impact case, and so the normal kind of handling, you can see it's taped over as I do usually because there's a very nice Anton Bauer logo. And also these batteries have a very nice sleep feature which detects lack of movement and switches the battery almost completely off when it's not used, when you just keep it, somewhere stored, which is a big plus for a lithium battery. Lithium batteries, unfortunately, they kind of leave a small amount of charge trickle out, even though they're not being used. So if the whole battery system goes to sleep and switches off almost completely, it's great. There is just one only problem with this battery. The International Air Transport Association, Class 9 dangerous goods. And what does that mean? Well, that means that you can't travel with these batteries in your checked luggage. You need to normally transport it with a specially certified case, and the transporter itself should be certified to be able to move the Class 9 dangerous good by air. But what's really funny is that you can't travel with these in your hand luggage, which, for me it doesn't make any sense. But as long as it's in your hand luggage, you can travel by plane. If you want to check these in more than 2 or even 1, you can't do that. So it's a problem. The larger Anton Bionic 160 is just completely forbidden, even as hand luggage. So this is the biggest capacity battery you can travel with by plane. The battery locks into the Anton Bauer QR-SP400A gold mount plate, which I've screwed onto the Redrock Micro Balance Plus, which is a vertical accessory plate for mounting Anton Bauer plates to standard 15mm rods. It allows very convenient horizontal adjustments, so I shifted the battery assembly away from the optical axis to my right in order to counterbalance the monitor, which is on my left. I've also glued 4.5 centimeters of closed cell polyethylene foam to the other side of the Redrock Microbalance Plus to create a pad against my shoulder blade. It allows to brace the rig, especially when tilting it down. It also allows to hang the rig on my shoulder when I need to take a quick break or to give instructions or adjust something. And it's also the crucial piece for the "look ma, no hands" trick when using the Crosssteel 3025 DV Balancer body brace, because otherwise the rig would just slide forward. The thickness, of course, of the padding will vary depending on your body. The battery plate itself has only 1 socket, so an Anton Bauer 1 male power tap to 4 female power tap sockets cable splits the power into 4 positions, and I'm using the 3 of them. The first is used for the Sweetronics PTXLR 28-inch power tap to 4-pin XLR cable that runs alongside the rig to power the monitor. The second is used for the Sweetronics XP DSLR 12C for the Canon 1D converter, and it runs to the Canon ACK E4 AC power adapter, which replaces the Canon lithium battery by an external power source with much more juice. And the third one is used by a Sweetronics XP Zoom 5 power tap Zoom H4n converter cable to power the audio recorder off the Anton Bauer battery. Unfortunately, I've had serious issues with it. The first unit I bought constantly heated up and then just switched off. The second unit I got heated up to melting temperatures, so a third unit was custom made to a higher amperage by Sweetronics, but it still becomes unbearably hot to touch, and the plastic just deformed after only a month of shooting. And so this kinda rounds up the main rig description. Here's the compact rig, fully assembled, because the one I've been showing to you before was lacking the follow focus unit and the handle, because I'm reusing it on the main rig just to save on weight and bulk. So let me show you how I use it, of course without the glasses because I'm short-sighted, unfortunately. Basically like this. I hold it with the left hand, and with the right hand I hold it and operate the follow focus at the same time, like this. Okay. And I'm using only one lens on this compact rig, and it's the 24-105mm, because the 70-200 would be just too shaky for a handheld something. And it all starts with a classical set of 15mm rods, and they are as short as possible to make a very compact assembly, and as long as possible to put all the accessories on them. So they are 23 centimeter length rods made out of carbon fiber. And again, I prefer carbon fiber because of stealth. You know, they are dark gray, and because of warmth. They kind of feel nicer in cold weather. And of course, they are very light. The attachment system on the compact rig is almost the same as on the main rig. I'm using the same Red Rock Micro clamp for the Really Right Stuff plates and clamps. And on top of that, I'm using, actually I've shown it to you already in the previous shots. I'm using a Really Right Stuff clamp with a lever. I'm not going to use it right now, but just for compactness, takes a slightly less space than the one with a knob. The left handle uses the same idea, the same principle that I've used for the right handle on the main rig. It's just a bit shorter, and even more than a bit shorter, and cut to size, and I forgot to repaint it. And you can see, compared to the right handle, uses the same clamp to attach to the 15mm rod, and it's just longer, and the handle is oriented like this instead of, you know, going down. But basically, if you even look from the side, you can actually see they're the same, and even running almost parallel to each other. The only thing that changes is the length, so the length of the rods and the orientation of the handles. That's it. On the compact rig, I use the same Zacuto Zwivel clamp that I use on the main rig, and it allows me to attach a cross steel 3025 DV balancer assembly. And when it's extended the full length, you can use it as a monopod by placing it on a knee or on a table or on a stiff bag or something. It's not as high as a regular monopod, but still it's very stable. And when you shoot, well, I have to scoop a bit because that's the max it will go, but the camera, you can actually pan to the left, to the right, and if it's in the car or on the train, you move almost in sync with the car or the train, and it allows you to keep the horizon level. A lot of train scenes were shot like that. And even operate with just one hand. You know, the focus, and adjust the zoom with the other hand, and it's much more stable than trying to keep it level, just, you know, handheld. For light control on the compact rig, I've used the Heliopan Vari-ND filter, which goes from 0.3 to 1.8 in non-incremental way, so you can adjust very precisely the amount of light that reaches the sensor. And optically, it's very, very good. Almost no color shift, even at the maximum settings. And the only drawback of this filter, which is not actually the problem of the filter, is that when you try to shoot from inside of aircraft, it doesn't work. You get some weird rainbow effects across the optical axis. And my guess is that that happens because the aircraft manufacturers put some kind of a polarizer on their windows. So it makes one polarizer on the window and 2 polarizers inside the filter, and that gives that weird rainbow effect. As a viewing and composition solution for the compact rig, I've chosen the Zacuto Z Finder Pro, which gives a 3 times magnification and snaps onto the rear LCD screen of the Canon 1D. So basically, I'm not using, okay, that's good. So you just use one eye and focus in, or the other eye. Of course, the right eye is much better because you can keep the left eye open and see the truck coming. The other very interesting use for this system is that you can pre-focus more or less in advance and then move compact rig on the shoulder somewhere against the wall and shoot like this. So even in super tight places, you have the possibility to shoot from here, placing the camera like from this place, which is impossible with bigger, heavier, bulkier cameras. The 2 main disadvantages of the Zacuto Z Finder are, first, the geometrical distortion of the whole system. I mean, it's very pronounced. And second is that this rubber thing just comes off way too easily. So even when you carry it or just slide like this, and it pulls off the anti-fog system. It's a kind of a sheet of plastic which drops generally in some mud or puddle. It's the same mounting frame, camera A and camera B, so they can be interchangeable. They're not glued, they use a kind of a removable sticky thing. For audio, I've selected the tiny Zoom H1 recorder. To attach it to the rig, I'm using the Redrock micro mount with micro spud in the same way I've used them to attach the monitor on the main rig. You may have noticed that I reused the follow focus and the right handle from the main rig in order to save on space and weight. The tricky part of this 2-rig system is the transition from one to the other. If I started with the main rig, I first had to remove the matte box, then remove the lens, the 24-105, then remove this screen assembly, just unscrew it and slide it off, but it's still attached with the wires. Then slide the follow focus off and the handle, slide it also off, and then slide it on the compact rig, secure everything tightly in position and ready to shoot. Place the hood, switch on the audio recorder, put on the Z Finder, and at the same time place the elements of the main rig in a kind of storable, packageable way, and then you're ready to shoot. 50% of any good movie, as you may know, is good sound. And in my case, for me, to my ears, the best sound is stereo sound. So I've used 2 audio recorders with XY stereo microphones, the Zoom H4n and the Zoom H1. The H4n was used for the main rig and the smaller H1 was used for the compact rig. It's quite simple. The main reason to choose both was the size. As you can see, both are very small and both provide good realistic stereo sound. The sound of the Zoom H4n is quite good. The microphone pickup angle is adjustable from 90 to 120 degrees, which is great. It can be powered from the Anton Bauer battery, but once the power is cut off, the unit loses all time and date settings, requiring me to keep a pair of AA batteries inside just for that, which negates all the weight savings. Also, the microphones are not isolated from the recorder. It's very sensitive to rig bumps or noise, like turning the follow focus. Records low frequency kind of noise, and it's a major pain to remove in post. The other problem is the low signal to noise ratio to my ears, and you absolutely have to use it with the windscreen. Otherwise, even just moving the rig in still air creates enough pressure to saturate the mics. And this Red Hat Zoom H4n Dead Cat is much better than the windscreen included with the Zoom. You basically pull it on and it makes a nice unit. And this way you can use it even near nightclub subwoofers or in strong wind on the seaside. The Zoom H1 is the super compact version of the H4n. It's quite plasticky, but very light, and the audio quality is extremely good for this size. It's very similar to the H4n. It's powered by only one AA battery, and it lasts for quite a while. I've positioned it on the left side of the compact rig. For this recorder, you also need a windscreen, otherwise the mics will peak at any movement through the air, and Red Hat makes an excellent Dead Cat windscreen for it as well. And actually it's bigger than the H1, the recorder. So a very nice system, 24-bit WAV files, but it has the same rig noise problem as the H4n. No microphone isolation. Any bumps or any sounds of the follow focus transmit to the microphones through the attachment point. For sound monitoring, I'm using the Etymotic Research ER4P headphones, and they are extremely compact. I mean, you can basically put them in a super small bowl, and they have excellent, absolutely excellent sound. They also have excellent isolation from the exterior, which is extremely important in nightclubs, where you can become deaf in like several minutes. I'm not even talking about sound monitoring. And I'm able to use them with just one ear and the other one just, dangling around in dangerous places, like when crossing the street, so I can hear a truck arriving. And they're perfect length, to attach to the rig, so I can put it down, put it up. And then they're almost unnoticeable. I mean, you really have to guess that I'm wearing some professional monitoring headphones. They look like, well, almost the iPhone headphones. So you don't look as professional, as news team sound man like. The other big advantage of these is that when you use them with my rig, they allow me enough space for my head. So let me just show you from the behind. My head can move around and does not bump into the camera. And I'm monitoring, with studio quality sound here. With the classical headphones, like the Sony MDR, I have a major problem, keeping my head level, and I really have to tilt it all the time. Otherwise, the the right earpiece is just bumping all the time against the camera body. Despite this bumping head problem, the Sony MDR7506 headphones are, excellent. They sound just perfect. They're very balanced, very truthful, very natural, and you can hear just the slightest nuances with these headphones. Yes, they are pretty unusable with the main rig, and they are extremely easy to spot by others. I just look more like a DJ actually. But I ended up using them in the studio for post-production, for mixing the sound. That's just perfect, very good. As I've explained in the beginning of the movie, I plan to carry all the gear, all the clothing, everything just by myself, and no checking luggage. The main reason was I was going to shoot inside the airport security zones and on the airplanes, so I needed my gear with me. The other reason for carrying, everything by myself, why not giving it to someone else, and or especially the main character. But the main character, the DJ, already carries a huge 23-kilo bag with a lot of vinyl, plus his own backpack. We sometimes could fit a battery or maybe even 2 batteries in his stuff, but the standard cinema industry approach is to use teams of logistics people to ship Pelican cases around with equipment and unpack on the set, repack afterwards, reship it, and it looks very impressive, those huge boxes with foam inside and really used up, and a lot of things going on. It looks actually very similar to army logistics, but it just doesn't work with a one-man crew, and there were no light, compact and tough rig bags or pouches for cinema gear, and there's still nothing on the market. They're generally extremely overbuilt, very heavy by themselves, just empty ones. So what I had to do, because I really had to shoot and actually carrying all this stuff, I had to design my own bags, my own backpacks, my own everything. And so, okay, I just went ahead and bought a Pfaff Expression 2 sewing machine, and from scratch I just learned sewing. Today I realized that I would have been better off buying a Juki with all automatic features. But I was starting out in sewing, and basically I've used all my knowledge of ultralight backpacking and the gear that's used there, and just applied it to camera gear backpacks. As a base of my carrying system, I've actually chosen something that you can buy. It's a standard Ultimate Adventure, also called EULA, conduit backpack. It's a 28-liter backpack using Dyneema Gridstop fabric. Dyneema is a special sort of plastic which is stronger than steel, and so it resists very abrasive sharp-edged pieces of any rig that you may want to put inside, and that I, of course, was putting inside. And I've added additional custom straps all around it, so it's nice and tight when it's filled up with irregular sized gear. And also a custom foam pad for my back, just for padding, because a lot of cinema gear is just it's not made for carrying on your back. It's polyethylene closed cell foam, very light, and the whole thing actually, well, not counting, I'm just talking about the backpack, is 760 grams, which is empty, which is extremely light. And normally this backpack is considered ultralight and is recommended for 6 kilo loads, but I was using it for 15 kilo loads, and amazingly it did work pretty well. Of course, I mean, it was a bit painful, but much better than even bigger, beefier backpacks. For the main rig itself, I've sewn, design of course, an extremely light and compact when you fold it, and water resistant bag. You can see it's this thin, made out of the same Dyneema gridstop fabric that you've just seen in the backpack. So you can actually carry metal parts, very heavy stuff inside. It won't kill, it won't make a hole in the bag. And let me just show it to you. Basically, of course, it's made out of several panels, because the rig is a very weird shape. So it works like this. I pick with just one hand, and put on the front side gently, and then just pull this thing over all around. Then I just convert myself to a squatting position, and there's a zipper basically running on the top. So let me try to show it to you. Here, the zipper itself is a water resistant YKK zipper, but even though it's water resistant, I added a flap on top, so when it rains, there's a double protection here. And after it's been zipped up, there are two straps running, front and top, and all connected to a shoulder strap. Just put it like this, and then you just stand up and you can walk away. And that's how I would fly. Of course, I'd add my backpack and no checked luggage. The great thing about this bag is actually it allows to put the monitor in front and use my belly as a brace, and it completely hides the rig from view. You wouldn't know what the hell is inside this bag, some weird thing, but not a camera. So it looks great for example, in Moscow, in even worse places. And that's how I would fly. And big thanks to Swiss International Airlines, who were giving us this special permission to fly with 2 bags. This system allows to attach the strap and use it just to hang the main rig on my shoulder without using the hands, which is very nice when you don't have an assistant carrying the camera for you. The front attaches to the Redrock Micro handlebar rod, and the back attaches to the Redrock Micro handle. The strap is lightly padded and very strong. Just another example of gear reuse for weight and space savings. I've also designed and sewn a pouch to hold and protect the B camera. I made it as small, light and tough as possible using the same Dyneema gridstop fabric. It's padded with polyethylene cloth cell foam for protection. Just slide the camera in and zip the water-resistant YKK zipper. I also had to sew a lens pouch for the Canon 70-200 or the 24-105 that would fit the diameter of the attached Redrock lens gears. Quite logically, Loewe Pro does not make lens pouches for these weird dimensions because they make gear for photographers, and the cinema industry bags are just overbuilt, too bulky, too heavy. This pouch also uses polyethylene cloth cell foam for protection, and I optimize it for easy access. Of course, I didn't need a second lens pouch because one lens is always on the rig.
This is the custom sewn filter pouch. You open it like this, and inside you find the filters. And the system uses the strength of glass to make an overall hard assembly. It's very difficult to break because of the amount of glass, and it doesn't really need any outside protection because it's very stiff. And that's the trick, because the whole thing is, the filter, pouch itself is very light. I have Schneider Optics 4x4 ND 0.6, 0.9, 1.2, 1.5 linear pole, circular pole, and ND Grad Soft Edge 0.9. And you close it like this. I've chosen the smallest Anton Bauer charger they have, which is the twin 60-watt two-position portable charger. It is huge. It is huge compared to the still photography chargers, as you can see here, compared to my hands. And it's quite heavy, but it allows to simultaneously charge two batteries on each side. So basically you put it like this, and you've got the thing you just can charge both using cable goes here. And it's very quick to charge. It's got very nice indicators here about the charging process. It's highly automated, but we had a problem with one, and I had to send it back and get it replaced, unfortunately. But it's still, to me, it's just way too big. I mean, it would take a lot of space in my backpack, you know, just for a charger. For the Canon, for the compact rig, because it had to be powered internally without using the outside battery, so I couldn't use the Anton Bauer to use the internal battery, which is like this. The charger is smaller, you know, compared, but still, you know, it's quite big, and you can charge only one battery at a time, which doesn't really make sense to me. Because it has slots for two batteries, but you basically use only one at a time. Quite big. To charge the AA batteries, I was using the GP Travel Bank, which is extremely small and light, and it doesn't require any sort of transformer. You just plug it in.
and it allows for battery is being charged. Look at this, and charges them pretty quickly. Very compact, very nice. I really like it. It allows to charge also from a car socket if you need to. For video, I was using the Lexar 32 gig compact flash cards. For the audio inside the Zoom H4n, I was also using a Lexar. I've always relied on Lexar. They're very good, just don't tend to break or corrupt stuff. And for the Zoom H1, I was using a SanDisk just because I couldn't find one made by Lexar. For the data, I was carrying all the time 4 LaCie 1 terabyte disks. They're all in FireWire 800, so I could daisy chain them to my Mac. Unfortunately, at the time when we were shooting, no daisy chainable Thunderbolt drives were available, so it was the fastest option and the smallest option. With FireWire, you don't have to use a hub to connect 4 devices, and it's pretty fast for a portable solution, and not, you know, huge. And this is 4 terabytes of data. For dailies and post-production, I prefer Final Cut Pro 10 to Avid, so I needed a Mac. And at the beginning of the shoot in the summer of 2011, the smallest and lightest Mac that had close to a 1 terabyte hard drive and enough processing power for native H.264 1080p viewing and editing was the MacBook Pro 13-inch, which I bought with a 2.7 gig dual-core Intel Core i7, 8 gig of RAM, and a 750 gigabyte 5400 RPM hard drive. Had I known, I would have probably bought the 15-inch Retina MacBook Pro, because I've missed a lot of issues like hot pixels when viewing dailies on the small 13-inch screen during our shoot in Russia, when I had no access to my big desktop display. The MacBook was simply downsampling the footage, and this contributed to the post-production hell. It just stretched to a full year and a major budget overrun. In the field, I daisy-chained the 4 LaCie disks and a Lexar Professional 800 CF card reader to offload the data using the FireWire 800. What about the weights of this whole system? The main rig was 8 kilos when using the 24 105mm lens on it. And the backpack, which includes the other lens and the camera B and the compact rig, was 15 kilos. So what really helped me during this shoot wasn't, books about how to shoot creatively, or, books on editing or anything else. What really helped me was weight training. I've been a long distance runner, cyclist and climber, but this shoot required much more muscle. So my piece of advice, if you're starting out and you're planning to shoot it yourself like I did, just add muscle, and add power muscle, not bodybuilding muscle for beauty, but functional muscle. So I hope this movie gives you new ideas, new perspectives on things, and challenges maybe kind of the standard assumptions, the standard approaches, and inspires you to find your own solutions and just create your own gear. So maybe stop thinking and just go and experiment, sew your own stuff, cut handles, move things around, and then go shoot, and then go shoot again, and then shoot again. Change it, experiment, make another prototype. And fortunately, because we can use the digital gear, we don't have to pay for film, and it allows us to do that. Use this opportunity, because 10 years before today, it was just impossible. So go ahead and just experiment, do it. Cut.